Welcome to the Natural News Talk Hour. I'm your host, Jonathan Landsman, and today we've got a great show. Hoodwinked, an economic hitman reveals why we are as close to a global financial collapse as ever before and what we can do to save ourselves. Our guest, John Perkins, is a self-proclaimed economic hitman and the best-selling author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman and The Secret History of the American Empire. John has lived 4 lives as an economic hitman, as the CEO of a successful alternative energy company, a teacher, and writer who used his expertise to promote ecology and sustainability while continuing to honor his vow of silence about his life as an economic hitman. As a writer, John has exposed the world of international intrigue and corruption that is turning the American Republic into a global empire despised by increasing numbers of people around the world. Please join me in welcoming John Perkins to our show. John, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you today. I'm really looking forward to this.
We're also joined by Mike Adams, editor of naturalnews.com. Mike, welcome.
Hey, good to be here, Jonathan, and this is a really amazing show with John Perkins. Just a great guest, especially for what's happening this year in 2012.
This show is for educational purposes only, and we're happy to announce that this program has not been approved by any government agency. John, for those who may not be too familiar with what's going on in the world and what your role was in this world that we live in, what exactly is an economic hitman?
Well, first of all, Jonathan, I'm not sure I should be on this show if it hasn't been approved by any government agency. I don't know that I want to. I don't know that I can put up with this. Obviously, it's tongue in cheek. I think it's fair to say that we economic hitmen have created the world's first truly global empire. And it's an empire that's been created for the first time in history, primarily not through the military, but through economic shenanigans. And the way economic hitmen work is varied. There's many different approaches, but perhaps the most common is that we will identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, for example, then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. However, the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes directly to big multinational corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, things like power plants and industrial parks that benefit a few of the very wealthy families in the country, but don't help the majority of the people. And of course, the primary beneficiaries are the multinational corporations that build the projects. And next to that are the wealthy families in the country who benefit from using the electricity or building the industrial parks. But the majority of the people get nothing out of it. Most of them can't afford electricity. They don't get jobs in industrial parks because industrial parks don't hire many people. And yet they're left holding a huge debt. The whole country has this huge debt that it can't repay. And so at some point we go back to the country and say, hey, since you can't pay your debt, sell us your oil or whatever the resource is real cheap without any environmental or social restrictions or limitations or demands, or vote with us on some critical United Nations vote, or allow us to build a military base on your soil, or send troops in support of ours to Afghanistan or Iraq or someplace. And in the few cases where we fail, where the economic hitmen are not able to convince leaders to do this, the jackals go in. And these are people that either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. I talk in my books, Hoodwinked and Confessions of an Economic Hitman, about how I failed with the democratically elected president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, and the head of state of Panama, Omar Torrijos. I was not able to corrupt these men. I was not able to get them to play this game, to buy into this system. And in both of those cases, those men were assassinated by CIA-sponsored jackals. In the few cases where the jackals also fail, like with Saddam Hussein in Iraq, then and only then does the military go in. And so this is this 3-step approach, really. And the first step usually is very successful, the economic hitman, a way of creating a truly global empire. And it's an empire that's oriented toward big corporations. It's the big corporations, the heads of those corporations, what I call the corporatocracy, that are really calling the shots.
Okay, John, I want to remind those who may have joined us a minute or two late that we are interviewing John Perkins here, and your website is johnperkins.org, the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman, The Secret History of the American Empire, and other books like Hoodwinked. I've got a question for you, John. Where do we see the economic hitmen and the jackals operating the most today? For example, is the MF Global downfall and John Corzine, is that an example of what you're talking about, or is that something entirely different?
Well, I think that goes along with the whole system. I'm not personally familiar with that, so I kind of hate to comment on it because I don't like to speculate, but it sounds like that's part of the system. For sure, we've got a lot of economic hitmen now running around the Middle East. We may have gotten rid of, we had no choice but to get rid of Mubarak in Egypt, Gaddafi in Libya. But, now we're trying to replace those people with similar type people, new faces, new names, but people who will support corporate expansion in those countries. We've got men and women in those countries trying to make sure that happens and that more radicalized Muslim organizations don't take over. We've got economic hitmen running around all of South America. I spend a lot of time there. South America is going through a very strong revolution, a democratic revolution. 10 countries in the last 10 years have elected presidents who are saying no in varying degrees to corporate exploitation. And every one of these 10 countries, incidentally, during most of my lifetime was run by brutal dictators put into power by the CIA and kept there by the CIA. That's all changed in this decade. But for sure, we've got economic hitmen in there trying to bring back the old system. We recently saw the overthrow of President Zelaya of Honduras because of this, and an attempted coup on Rafael Correa of Ecuador. Economic hitmen are all over Africa and much of Asia, as well as the Middle East. So it's a very, very prevalent force in the world today.
So it's, when people initially hear this kind of stuff, John, I know it can be a big shock to them, but, the subprime mortgage fiascos that we hear about, rising unemployment, the dollar doesn't seem to have the same strength as it used to, plus so much more. And you turn to those people who are not fully awake and you say, look, stop looking at conventional news. Stop looking at the blame that's being placed on this person and that person. What I hear from you is, and it's very clear, this is all being done by design by a small group of people on the planet. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, it is a fair assessment, and I'd like to say off the bat that I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Many of the people who are behind this don't even know each other. They've never met. They don't have to get together and conspire to do something illegal. But they're all driven by one motive, one goal, and that goal is to maximize profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. This is a goal that was defined by Milton Friedman and the Chicago School of Economics back in the 70s when I was an economic hitman. Before that, for example, when I went to business school in the 60s, we were taught that corporations, yes, they should make a decent rate of return on their capital, but they also needed to treat their employees really well. Health insurance, retirement funds. They needed to treat their customers and their suppliers really well. It needed to be good community citizens, pay good taxes, support the school system and the library system. But all that changed in the 70s when this new standard was sent out, that the only responsibility of business is to maximize profits, regardless of social and environmental costs. That has ruled the business world ever since. And every U.S. president, beginning with Reagan, every Democrat and Republican since has bought into this. It's a very terrible system. It's greedy, it's highly materialistic, and it goes to support that famous 1% and working to the detriment of the rest of us, the 99%, all over the globe. And we're seeing now that it's a failed system. It simply isn't working. It's falling apart, and it should fall apart.
So, John, if this system fails, and I think many people listening and watching would agree that it is crumbling and the failure of it is very obvious, how does it get replaced, or how do we replace it, reform it, revolutionize it? What's next for solutions and the consciousness that you mentioned at the top of the hour?
It's a great question, and I think the first thing we need to be clear on is that we should be thankful that it's falling apart, because it's a terrible system. As just one example, less than 5% of us live in the United States, and we consume almost 25% of the world's resources, while roughly half the world is starving to death or are on the verge of starvation. And of course, out of that 5% of us who live in the United States, 1% of that 5% gets most of the resources. So this is a terrible system, and we need to replace it with something that's much more just, much more environmentally sustainable, and a system that will ensure that people and nature, in fact, sentient beings around the world thrive. Nobody needs to be a multimillionaire, but let's let everybody thrive. And I think
John, this is the point, John, right? I mean, not to be misunderstood by anyone listening to this program, is that for this system to fall apart does not mean total chaos for every single individual. For this system to go away and to stop profiting a few people, that there are many people that can still have very profitable businesses. People could still have a lot. I mean, please speak to that. This is a great world that you're describing that we're heading towards in a very accelerated way.
I totally agree, yes. We should be moving, and we can be moving, into a position where we'll all be much better off, except maybe that 1%. And frankly, I don't think they're not well off. I know a few of those people that are extremely wealthy, and none of them seem to be very happy. They don't need all those toys that they have. I think what we need to understand is that today we have an economy in the United States, and in fact, it's pretty much a global economy that's in the United States. Over 60% of our official budget is spent on killing people, the military. We're a militarized economy. Let's take that money and instead spend it on creating situations where starving people can feed themselves. And, another huge part of our budget goes to creating trinkets that really most of us don't even need, and a lot of rich people own a lot of these trinkets, while at the same time they create a lot of pollution. So what we need to do is move forward into a new type of economy that's focused on cleaning up the terrible pollution of this planet. All over this planet, the earth is polluted, the water is polluted, the air is polluted. Let's clean it up. And we've got roughly 3 billion people on this planet that are on the verge of starvation or actually starving. Let's create an economy that will help them grow food more efficiently and store it and distribute it. Let's create new economies around sustainable energy and better transportation systems, better banking systems. Let's get rid of the Federal Reserve and come up with a true banking system and more communication system. We are communicating for the first time in human history. Everybody on the planet is communicating with everybody else. But what are we communicating? As you mentioned before, the mainstream media is not giving us news. It's entertainment at best and pure propaganda at worst. Let's change that. And let's stop worrying so much about, who's sleeping with who in Hollywood and, who threw the most passes in the 1972 Super Bowl game. And let's get down to creating a world that our children and grandchildren are going to be proud to inherit. Let's have more programs like this where we're discussing real things and real solutions and inspiring people to move forward into creating a much better world for all of us. We can do a lot better than we've done so far.
John, what's your take on, in talking about those solutions and talking about real revolution that serves the interests of the people, for example, there is an environment